Hello, everyone. This is Rumble. I'm Michael Moore. We are now a month past the moment, more than a month now, past the moment where Joe Biden was declared the winner of this election. And so we are still, today in the news, 17 states have told the Supreme Court, they filed one of those friendly briefs or whatever they're called, the Supreme Court saying that they support the Attorney General of Texas, who is trying to stop and overturn this election. These people have not given up. And that 17 states attorneys general have joined in on this. And I think, maybe a lot of you listening to this, a little bit of me too, have sort of, relaxed a little bit here, thinking that, okay, we got through this. We're okay. And then you see this happen today, and you see Trump is just like mad tweeting, big hashtag in blue, not in black. The tweet was in blue. It was one word, in all caps, overturn. Now, first of all, props to him for figuring out how to get a tweet in color, because I still can't do that. So, all right, he's got that figured out. But I thought today we have got to talk to an expert because I am now back to being legitimately worried about what the hell is going on, and whether that results in Trump succeeding, which of course we all hope and know and pray that he doesn't. But what does this mean for the future? Before we go any further, I also want to thank our other underwriter for today's episode, if I can just take a second to do that. It's Raycon. They have been with us now for a few months. Raycon, of course, makes those great wireless earbuds, high quality, but unlike the other earbuds, half the price. So these were invented by the great songwriter and rapper Ray J. And of course, he's got Snoop Dogg and Melissa Etheridge and a bunch of others using them. I love them. The holiday season has started. People are looking for things to give to others and to give the gift of music in a way where that music sounds so good and can be done at an affordable price, considering what some of these other things are what they're charging. You get 6 hours of playtime with them. It's got more bass, very compact design, very easy to carry around. And it's amazing, too, how it just cuts out all the other noise that's around or in the room or whatever. So give them a try. All you got to do is, go on their website. You just go on to buyraycon.com/rumble. Go there today. You get the 20% off your Raycons. You'll be listening to this podcast. That's it. Thank you. Thank you, Ray J, for supporting this podcast. And thank you, Raycon. Buy Raycon. That's BUYRAYCON. Okay. Buyraycon.com/rumble. I've invited a person onto the podcast here today that many of you may remember if you watched my last film, Fahrenheit 11/9, not 9/11, 11/9. That's the date in 2016 that Trump was elected. And if you haven't seen it, it's free on Prime right now for, I think, the next year. So please watch it. But my guest here said some very powerful things in this film. And you'll recall, if you have seen the film, that we showed how Donald Trump did not just simply fall out of the sky. The Trump presidency was the logical conclusion to decades of a corrupt political system, a brutal economic system, and us collectively never really confronting our racist and sexist past or present, and due to many years of purposeful dumbing down of our society, turning us from citizens into consumers. Trump, as I've said before, was not an aberration or a mistake. Trump is us, or a certain version of us. If you watched that film of mine, you'll also remember that the scholar and author Ruth Ben-Ghiat warning us about the fascist threat from Donald Trump. This film we're talking about. This is back in 2018. Ruth is a professor of history and Italian studies at NYU. And she's now written a book called Strong Men, From Mussolini to the Present. In it, she studies Trump in the context of fascist rulers throughout history and their use of lies, corruption, and threats of violence to stay in power. And my friends, I am excited right now to once again be speaking with Ruth Ben-Ghiat. Welcome to Rumble, Ruth.
Thank you. I'm glad to be speaking with you.
Yes, it's been a while, but your words from that film ring in my ears to this day. And I guess I just want to ask you, because I'm sort of laughing along with all the goofiness that Trump is doing, and the things that he's everything that he's up to right now. So we've all had a good laugh now that Biden is the president-elect, and we're watching Trump and we're watching Rudy, and we're watching that great Saturday Night Live skit the other night where they didn't do any writing. The writers, they literally, and the way that they played the characters with the exact people in Michigan, that it was just stunning to see. And I think this is the best way now with satire, is trying to satirize that which is already pre-cooked as satire. It's impossible. So to just give into it and just reenact it, that hearing that the Michigan Senate, controlled by the Republicans in Michigan, had last week. And we're all having a good laugh over it. And then the week before that, Rudy's hair dye dripping down his face. I posted something from The Onion today about it showed Rudy in front of the he's at the Georgetown Hospital with COVID-19 right now. So it shows him downstairs in the basement of the Georgetown University Hospital, in front of the hospital incinerator. He's got the door open and he's screaming, "COVID shall die with me." He's throwing himself into the incinerator. Okay, it's a little dark. It's funny. But Ruth, something tells me it's a little bit too early, like the football player that starts celebrating on the 2-yard line, not knowing somebody's right behind him and he's not going to make it into the end zone, that we might be doing an end zone dance on the 2-yard line here, in the sense that, I don't want to scare people that all of a sudden holy hell is going to break loose. But I think it's maybe a little too early to just be sitting back and having a good laugh off of Trump's foibles.
Oh, I agree. But to the point of Rudy in the incinerator, it brought to mind a quote from Charlie Chaplin, who's a very good observer of humanity, and it's in my book Strong Men. He said something like, "Dictators come from below, and then they dig themselves into holes and go even lower, and the world watches and jumps into the hole with them."
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a great quote.
So I use that where, these are very destructive rulers, everybody from in their own way, from Mussolini up to Trump, and they help people to be their worst selves, and they are, as leaders, the worst they could be, especially when people need them the most. And these are things that I conclude at the end of this book. But Trump has all the characteristics, he has all the tendencies, and we're seeing all the results.
Are we in trouble? Are we?
We're in trouble, and I've never been able to do much laughing. I don't want to be a party pooper, but I always find these things very frightening, because what's going on now has been set up by Trump for 5 years now, with his propaganda about rigged elections, his brainwashing of his followers, the loyalists, all the system. He's set up this kind of authoritarian political culture, and the GOP's been very happy. And what he's mainly done, that's coming home to roost now, is he's legitimized lawlessness. And I had to turn in my book in the summer, so I didn't know how the election would end. But the last things I say about Trump is that I predicted he wasn't going to leave office quietly, and I didn't know what else would happen. So this is very predictable. The rhetoric is predictable, and we're in. So people are talking about coups, and it does qualify as like a self coup when someone's in power and doesn't want to leave, but it's also a kind of shock event. And men like Trump love to give a shock to the system, to see like a jolt to the system, to see what they can get away with. And so that's what we're seeing now.
So he's testing.
Oh, he's testing, and he's been
Yeah.
trying. He's tried. So he's trying the electoral stuff, and then he clearly investigated the military option, which is why General Milley, all of a sudden came out and pointedly said, "Oh, hi, the armed forces is going to obey only the Constitution and not an individual." So he tried that, and that wasn't working. So now he's still, going on with the electoral maneuvers, and he's also starting with the energizing the militia and that whole route.
It's I find my laughter over all this is I realized it's not because I think it's funny. I'm afraid, frankly, and I think the laughter is a mechanism to shoot some kind of endorphin wherever that's at in my brain to sort of calm down what's going on, and everybody. I'm sure most people listening to this podcast right now are saying, "Mike, Ruth, it's going to be okay. It's going to be okay." Systems are in place. Even Judge Amy wouldn't go along with the Pennsylvania request a couple of days ago, and so that's a good sign. That's a good sign. And yeah, okay, it's a good sign, or is it? I'm not so quick to just feel better or to feel good. Oh, good. Judge Amy did the right thing. Well, I don't really know what went on. Maybe it wasn't a good case for them to hang their hat on. I mean, that's why they've been waiting for the right abortion case where they can really, really get rid of Roe v. Wade. And maybe that's what will happen this year. But I think right now, in the moment that we're in, that he's still calling speakers of the House in state legislatures. He knows that these legislators can kind of, in some ways, do what they want to do. The electors can kind of do what they want to do, depending on the different state laws and rules about this. But I think you just made me think of something, this idea of testing, maybe not so much for what he hopes the outcome will be this year, but because he's not going away.
Right.
And because there are other people like him who are smarter than him, who are every bit as much in favor of authoritarianism. They too want to see, how far could you get in this country? How far?
That's an important point. Everything that's being done is, and it's very important that Democrats have a vehement reaction. Even if we get to January and Biden takes office, it's very important to have a strong pushback against all the corruption and all the normalizing white supremacy, because other people are watching, and these could be other Trumps. Ivanka Trump has been marketed for years as a world leader. This is one of the things that made me very distressed when I saw her inserted repeatedly into world leader photos, like in 2019, the G20 photo. She's not just in the photo, she's in the center.
Right.
And I thought, what appeasement is this? Why didn't Macron and Trudeau and these people, why is she there? But she's there for a reason. So it's both Trumps who are watching, and it's also other people. But so many people are, and it's a way of saying, well, something worse could come, and that's true. But I prefer to keep the focus now on the thing we know that's very bad that we have right now, because we're not out of the woods yet.
And describe what that is, what we have right now, where that focus should be.
So we're in this waiting game, which sounds like we are very passive, but we're in the middle of this attempt to illegally stay in power, to manipulate. So this is what, in the book that goes over 100 years, it's divided into 3 periods. You have the fascist years, you have military coups, and I'm doubly glad that I devoted so long to studying coups now. And then you have this new authoritarians, which is 21st century people, and they come in through elections. So the military coup is kind of, it's not as common now. And then they have to manipulate elections to stay there. And that's what Putin has done. In fact, Putin's taken it to a whole other art where, he has to poison people who are rivals, like Alexei Navalny, to keep them off the ballot, right?
Right.
So, but he's been there for 20 years. And so a lot of people, I remember when we did our film together, people would say, well, why are you talking about Trump as a fascist? And, you're making this film, you're speaking out. But everybody started somewhere. And a lot of the leaders that Trump admires, they've been in power a long time. And so I prefer to look, he's done a lot, Trump, in 4 years. Look at how he's domesticated the GOP. He's actually had a lot of success in certain goals that he had, which are not goals of Democratic presidents.
Right. And the power that he had before the presidency. I mean, he was a dominant figure in our culture, a dominant figure in the culture and media capital of New York. A lot of us out in the Midwest, we didn't see the cover of the New York Post every other week with him at Studio 54 or whatever girlfriend he had or whatever, that we didn't know about him. But the people in power, media, financial, culture, they knew of him here very well in New York. And, this 5 years we've had to put up with him since he came down the golden escalator. How about what was it? I don't know, 4 years before that, when he started in real. I mean, he didn't start it, but he took it and became the leader of birtherism.
Yeah, that was his entry into, when he was exploring a presidential run. He hitched his wagon to conspiracy theories and overt racism, and then, some years later, it was after 8 years of Barack Obama, which many Americans it was an affront that Barack Obama was even in office. And this, by the way, is, so the book has a lot of, it's looking for patterns. And so one of the main things is that these leaders like Trump, they find fortune when there's been a lot of social emancipation, either racial equity, taboos, and have fallen by the wayside, like having an African American as president, gender equity, workers' rights, and then these figures come up and they're going to turn the clock back, and that's why elites are all too happy to partner with them. But the other thing is with Trump, that we were saying before, is this glamour figure. I think that when these men come to office and do their destruction, cultures learn a lot about themselves, and you have to ask yourself hard questions. Usually after the rubble, in the smoking rubble, when they're gone. And one of them is that I only have male leaders, and I talk a lot about virility as a tool of rule. I take it seriously because we've had this fetish of a certain model of power that's built on this kind of, outlaw, male glamour, and all the things that Trump is. And so in that sense, and it impoverishes politics, it reduces politics to spectacle. And so in a sense, all of these things come together with Trump, and he's shown how devastating it can be to when someone like that gets power and is adulated, and those values take over. And it's very destructive.
And talk about adulation. 74 million of our fellow Americans voted for him. I had many concerns and various worries about, I kept telling people before the election, take him seriously. Don't do what you did last time. The fact that it went up 11 million, in other words, these are 11 million people who did not vote for him in 16, watched what he did for 4 years and went, not bad. I like that. And came out and voted for him. And I thought for sure, I mean, every the statistic that 53% of white women voted for him in 2016. And that was 2/3 of white men. And I used to make this joke about how anytime you see three white guys walking down the street toward you, you need to cross to the other side because two of them voted for Trump. But the fact that, well, first of all, so it went from 53% of white women voting for Trump in this election. Now the early, and I don't think all the data's in yet, it shows 55% of white women voted for Trump. So it went up 2 points with white
Yeah,
women.
and this brings up this, and it's an eternal question. Why do the most misogynistic, women bashing leaders have these broad bases of women who vote for them? Because it's not just Trump. Before, in Italy, you had Berlusconi, who was very similar in many
Right.
respects, even had this like special relationship with Putin, which is how I start the book, on that the night Obama was elected. Instead of watching, the results like most world leaders, Berlusconi, who was married at the time, was getting ready to have sex with an escort, and he tells her, because the conversations are wiretapped, he tells her to wait for him at Putin's bed, because Putin gave him a bed. They had this like male bond, and he gave Putin a duvet with their faces on it.
Oh
So,
my God.
but this is one of his biggest bases was housewives, and he was the most misogynist. Is exactly like Trump, and so there is this. I was trying to figure this out while writing the book. Why does this happen? And some of it's racism.
Sure.
Some of it is white women feel superior to non-white men. When you have a leader who makes this community of inclusion, included and excluded, which goes with authoritarian politics. But they also like his theatricality, because he's always the victim, he's always whining. And so on the one hand, he's the alpha male. On the other hand, he actually makes people feel protective of him because he needs protecting. So I have this collection of quotes from journalist articles. They go to rallies, they interview women, and women, this one, they'll say stuff like, I would wade through a sea of COVID to protect Trump.
Yeah.
And this is because they're performers and they know how to perform this. It seems authentic to people. And so that's something we can't really all this might seem like very superficial, but it works.
I was having dinner after the 2016 election, about a month after, with a group of filmmakers. We were just sitting talking, what do we do now? What lessons can we learn from this? And one of the women filmmakers said that she wasn't surprised at all that Trump got the white female, not the black female. The black female vote was like 97, 98% for Hillary, but the white female vote. And her theory on this was what you had just started to mention a few minutes ago, was they actually are attracted to him. The virility and the sort of, he has this sort of swagger that's a kind of a fuck you swagger. And that she said that women, especially women who are married to who she called Opioid Joe, like they're looking at Trump on the TV full of swagger, never takes his mafia trench coat off. And then they look over on the couch and there's the husband asleep, doped up, and then look back at the TV, look over at the couch, and it's like, yeah, I'd rather be with that guy.
Yeah, and no one's more glamorous than Donald Trump. And men also look up to him because he has only the most beautiful women around him. And Berlusconi did this too. They surround themselves with models and beauty queens. And so they seem to have it all.
And I think men too also like him, if I can just speak on behalf of my gender. It seems like he can just say anything he wants, do whatever he wants. And of course, everybody has this fantasy that, God, what would life be like if you literally could just say what you wanted to say, do what you want to do, to hell with everything else. And it seems to guys, especially, and especially the working class that already feels so beaten down by the system, that here's this guy that just doesn't give a shit. And when he says I could shoot somebody in the middle of Fifth Avenue and get away with it, like that to a guy, that's just, he's playing the best piece of music you could play at that point.
Yeah, and actually, this is a theme throughout the book because they all do this. They have this macho lawlessness, and that's what authoritarianism has been. It's been getting away with things, and so they're personality cults. I have an op-ed in the LA Times today on Trump's personality cult, and it's really interesting. The canons haven't like the rules of the personality cult haven't changed for 100 years, and Trump fits them all. So you have to be a man of the people, like very approachable, but you have to be a man above all other men. You're the man who gets away with things ordinary men can't. So there we go with the, I could shoot someone. And, what he's saying is I wouldn't lose followers. He's also saying he's going to get away with it. He's not going to be prosecuted.
You live in an apartment. You see, this is again the male, the mind that we are blessed with through evolution. If I could use both of those words. We are taking down the garbage, living in the apartment building here, taking it down to the garbage room. And there's the blue bin and the green bin and the beige bin. And we're supposed to, one's for glass and one's for plastic and one's for cardboard or newspaper. And, every guy, not every guy. Okay. Not every guy looks at this and just for once would like to say, fuck it. I'm just putting this trash right here. I'm just putting it down the chute. I'm not going to, I'm tired of being told what to do. And if you've ever been married to any of us, or if you had a brother or brother-in-law or whatever, you have to put up with this. And I know it's got to be awfully infuriating at some point, but
the rule breaking is really important.
It's so important.
And it actually it connects to what's going on now, because I believe that authoritarianism is not just about following orders. It's about feeling liberated, that to think there are no limits, and the leader sets the example of lawlessness. And so I think that somebody like William Barr and Lindsey Graham, because people are always talking about Lindsey Graham like, he hated Trump and all of a sudden something happened. So people say, oh, is he being blackmailed? And Trump blackmails a lot of people. We know that. But I also think with these characters, some of them had this life of like seeming rectitude. And all of a sudden they're allowed to break the rules, to do things that were not okay to do, and they get rewarded by Trump for doing it. So Barr has politicized justice. Then he was going on private missions to Rome, but it was never clear what was going on there. He's doing things that he wouldn't have been able to do. And I think this is very thrilling for a lot of people. And so in the book, I added a chapter on corruption because I needed to explain these things. And it's not just financial corruption, it's moral corruption. Like, how do they get conspirators to do their bidding? Like people like Barr, who's in the book. And this rule breaking is a lot of it.
Who else do you have? So we've mentioned Berlusconi and Putin, and of course Mussolini's in the title. But what other examples, historic examples, can you share with us to make us feel not so abnormal, in the sense that Trump is part of a larger collective of authoritarian thought, of totalitarian behavior, and many of these men. Yes, we say men because I'm sure that there must be a woman or two throughout history that has created a genocide of millions of people, or you can stop me at any point here, because we know that historically women who have their own issues generally don't do these things. But what these men, give me some other examples here that we may not be thinking of right off the top of our heads historically, but actually we can see that there's been a connect the dots effort here amongst various so-called leaders throughout the world.
Yeah, so all the chapters go, so the core of the book is these chapters on the tools of rule: propaganda, corruption, virility, and violence. And the myth of national greatness is like Make America Great Again, and put that in historical perspective. So all of them go over 100 years, so you could see how certain situations repeat. So, for example, So I have like Gaddafi, I have Mobutu. So it's a global. I have Pinochet in Chile, which is very interesting. What happened because of the coup. But what's very interesting is that Trump's this is not good for us, but Trump's character is exactly the same as the character of Mussolini and of Mobutu and Gaddafi, and they set up similar governance structures. And the outcome's very different, of course. We're not in a one-party, old-fashioned dictatorship, but the character is the same. So they set up these inner sanctums filled with flatterers and sycophants and family members, because family members are always in there because they can be counted on to be corrupt. And there's even a paragraph about sons-in-law who have special duties, from Mussolini's son-in-law to Jared Kushner. So it was remarkable, the dysfunctions that come from these very flawed, destructive people getting absolute power. And of course, Trump is not ruling in a one-party state, but he's been able to exert absolute power within the GOP, to the point where they acquitted him in the impeachment trial. And Sherrod Brown, the Democratic senator, went around and asked Republicans off the record why they acquitted Trump, and they all said they were afraid. They feared. And so this is a dynamic that you find with Gaddafi's rule, you find it with Mussolini's rule, and so these are things that continue.
All these adjectives in the subhead of your book, Strong Men, and it ends with virility and violence. I think we've got the virility part covered pretty well, but the violence, I think I was watching Nicole Wallace here yesterday, and she asked Steve Schmidt, another ex-Republican, when will they, meaning Trump and his followers now, cross that line of violence? And he said, cross it. It's in the rearview mirror. It's already been crossed. A threat is violence. Language can be violence, and violence is violence. And in fact, this last weekend, with the Secretary of State, the state of Michigan, Jocelyn Benson, she's in charge of the elections. And all of a sudden, she's putting up Christmas decorations in her house with her 4-year-old. And all of a sudden, she hears this noise outside the house, and she opens up the door, and there are all of these people, mostly men, with guns, with long guns. And they are, what's the new chant now? Not lock her up, but stop the steal. Stop the steal. Stop the steal. They're brandishing these guns. I'm just, and being a Michigander, I'm like, I can't. Well, here we are now, many days, a week almost later. And nothing has happened to these men who were there threatening her and her children there in the house at her private residence. Mm-hmm. I swear to God, if I did that at outside of somebody's house like that with guns and a bunch of people with me, I think I need a lawyer and some bail money. The fact that all these days later that they have not been arrested, not been charged, not even been called in for questioning. We don't even know who they are. I don't understand. I mean, I'm sorry. I support the Attorney General in Michigan. I voted for her. She's actually great. And there's, but where are the police? Where are the state police? Why haven't these individuals been taken in? How is it in a free society? Look, they have a right to protest. I'm completely in support of that. And they have a right to protest outside her home too. I think that's maybe a little much, not right to bring the family in like that, especially kids, but they have a right to protest. And you know what? I don't like it, but they have a right to that gun that they're carrying. Here's what they don't have a right to do. Protest with that gun outside the private home and anytime. Isn't it? I'm not a lawyer, but I think I know the law. If you do something, it's the old, putting your thumb and your finger in your pocket to make it look like you've got a gun. If you do anything that gives me the sense, that puts me in a sense of danger and fear, that something could happen to me in any minute right now, any second I could be dead, that causing that is the act of violence.
Yeah, and we also have to, again, when you look at these things with the eye of authoritarian contexts, and context matters. This is an election official being harassed and threatened, and these are things that happened in Putin's Russia. It also reminds me of early fascism when Mussolini was still a prime minister of a democracy, and we always think about Hitler for good reasons, but Mussolini is much more relevant because he was prime minister for 3 years of a democracy, and he legitimized. There was already a lot of violence from squadrism, like also in Germany, but he legitimized violence around elections. There are many parallels before he declared dictatorship, and so these are things that happen in not in democracies. And I think that one of the hard truths that we will need as a nation to reckon with to protect our democracy going forward is to look at America with different eyes. And I think one of the strengths I've had coming to this is that I'm not a historian of America, and I spent a lot of time outside, America. My parents are not American, and so I studied the history of fascism and other regimes. And then I took this global lens and I trained it on America starting in 2016. And things look very different. Everything from GOP's race politics to what's going on now. And Trump he's always used an authoritarian playbook. And so he's energized these extremists, and this is what these men do. They take existing extremist tendencies and anti-democratic tendencies and they legitimate them. And then they radicalize the police. And Barr's been working very hard to radicalize the police. I've read all of the speeches he's given to police associations, and they're very frightening. They're
It's awful.
They're right-wing authoritarian. The rhetoric is Some of it actually overlaps with what Pinochet used to say in Chile.
Yeah, don't be fooled just because Barr didn't go along with this latest thing and Trump's mad at him. That's just a sideshow that's going on. Barr is historically and certainly in his time as Attorney General, more than one attorney and more than one constitutional scholar has pointed out the lawlessness of our Attorney General here in the form of Bill Barr. I have two big questions here to ask you, and so obviously the first one is the short term. What do we do right now? It's still, what is it? I don't know, 40 days till the inauguration, somewhere around that. We've got to get there. We got to get them out of there. And I know I'll ask you the long term question next, but the short term, what do we do? What do people listening to this? What can they do to because I think we must not let our guard down. That this is not paranoia. This is not anything other than just being smart. Every time, and everybody listening to this, just think of anything that has happened during the Trump years. You said to yourself at some point, "Oh, well, that's the end of him now," or he'll never get away with that, or that he's definitely going. And every time. And you can say, yeah, well, okay, he lost the election, but I haven't said this on my podcast yet. He won in 2016 by winning the 3 states of Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin, and it was a total of 77,700 votes. This time, Biden won. Trump lost by losing Georgia, Arizona, and Wisconsin. That's where those electoral votes are that put Biden. If just those 3 puts Biden over by 2 electoral votes, but Biden only won those 3 states by 42,000. So Trump won his 3 states that got him in the White House with a 77,000 vote margin. Biden 42,000 vote margin. So I'm legitimately on guard here. What do we need to be aware of, be thinking about, and be ready to do should Trump start succeeding in his attempt to overturn this election?
Yeah, I think that one of the interesting things has been the strength of democracy at the local level. right? And even among some Republican judges who've turned back his attempts to nullify the results and all the other maneuvers he's doing. And that's been interesting to me because Trump has been trying to, exert executive authority over cities and states from the beginning, and that's part of his authoritarianism, like punishing cities for being sanctuary cities, if you remember. And all of his stuff has always played. All of his shock events have always played out at the local level and caused chaos at the local level, and also now with his criminal mismanagement of the pandemic. So there's a lot of ill will that he has at the local level, even among some Republican officials, and that's been interesting. So some people who are more optimistic, including people who were in the Republican Party and congressmen, think that after the Electoral College meets, some of the Republicans who've been privately talking to Biden and congratulating him, but they're too afraid to publicly admit that Trump lost. Some people think that that will be a turning point. I think that's next week, right?
Yeah.
I'm not sure. I hope that's the case, of course. And I have been, and I'm the opposite of starry-eyed, but it's been interesting to me that this phenomenon that's called elite defection hasn't happened more. And that is when you make your authoritarian bargain with the elites, the GOP, and they stick with you through thick and thin, right? No matter what you do or say, they stick there with you, right? But when it looks like the person is his stars falling, he's going down, usually in history, they start to peel off these people.
They're not peeling off.
And that's why when people say Trump's a clown, and I can't deal with people still saying that Trump isn't serious, he's not competent. He's been highly competent at doing what he wanted to do. And this is the result we have. So some people who know Republican politics very well, having been part of them, do believe that there will be some movement among Republicans after the Electoral College. If that doesn't happen, then we're looking at an even more dire situation.
Yeah, there are 52, 53 Republicans in the U.S. Senate. As of today, as we're recording this, only six of these 52, 53 Republicans in the Senate, and only 20 of the 200 or so Republicans in the House. Wow. To expect that on Electoral College Day, that they're all going to just, okay, water's safe, everybody in the pool.
No.
I have a feeling, I think it may be a little more like this. Obviously, in reality, they'll have to accept the fact that there's somebody else living at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, but they can also do what the New York police did to Bill de Blasio in his first year, when he just uttered some just kind of harmless comment about how the citizens are to be treated by the police, and how he was going to get rid of the stop and frisk laws that were hugely racist. And so de Blasio shows up. I don't know if it was for memorial service or something. Do you remember this? And all the police turned their backs on him, and he had to walk down this long row of police on either side, being shunned with their backs turned. And I think, sadly, this will be one of the successes of Trump in his final 40 days, is that he will get the majority of Republicans in the Senate and the House, vast majority of them, to just not acknowledge that he's there, and just refuse to participate in anything that would help the people of the United States of America.
Yeah, I think that's right. And then the other part of this is that Trump is saying, now whether this happens or not, it doesn't matter in a sense right now. He's saying he's going to run in 2024. And the reason this is important is that Trump has spent a huge amount of effort cultivating the obedience of all these Republicans, making them afraid. You can only imagine what kind of Oppo research and other things have gone on to keep these people in line, and cronyism. So he's not going to give that up, and he's not going to give his personality cult up with his. He's going to take his 74 million souls with him, like the devil he is, and and
Right.
but the effect will be to keep the troops in line.
Right.
And the thing I'm longer term worried about is actually trying to, and this comes from writing about Chile. So what happened in Chile is before the coup was designed to take away the socialist president Allende, and the CIA was involved very heavily, but so were many Chileans. And they basically used psychological warfare and economic warfare and various things to make Allende's presidency ungovernable, very, very difficult. Polarization, all kinds of things that went on. And the point was, even though they were planning a coup, the point was to turn popular opinion against, and elite opinion against Allende. So they would accept the coup. So I'm a little worried that that the Republicans, led around by ringmaster Trump, whether he runs or not, he'll still be there, and they will try and make the Biden-Harris administration unworkable. They will also sow civil unrest and make things extremely unstable, so that when 2024 comes, or even the 2022 midterms, the Republicans will be in good shape, and the Democrats will look like a crisis. It'll be like a continuing crisis. That's a longer term thing I'm afraid of.
Okay. Well, that then leads into this last question. What about the long term here? Those 74 million aren't going anywhere. I just think, wow, you know, Trump almost won in a landslide. What turned out the extra, 14 million? Biden got 14 million more votes than Hillary did. Where'd they come from? Well, I mean, they were asked by pollsters, why did you vote for Biden? And the number one answer was to get rid of Trump,
Yeah.
or he's not Trump. 58% said that. That was their answer. Wow, it wasn't because of Biden. So what does this mean in the sense of what's ahead here for us? Because those 74 million Trump voters, they're not going anywhere.
So Trump is a danger in and of himself, but he's just as much a danger because he has crossed these thresholds and allowed others to cross them, where things that you thought were unthinkable are now possible, both in the legitimation of lawlessness, in the getting both grassroots solid support, which we saw even grew, and elite support for somebody who's incompetent and doesn't care about the American people and doesn't care about his job, because Trump's job as president was never to govern Americans. It was always to make money for Trump Organization, and that's why he's been at a Trump property 1 out of every 3 days. So when people point to his golfing and they say he's lazy and he's nothing to be afraid of, he's working very hard when he's golfing to make money for Trump Organization. So he did those things very, very successfully. But he also, in the process, just struck down all kinds of norms of ethics in government and any kind of norm. That's what his goal was, to break norms. And so someone else can come along and do that far more competently. And this goes back to the hard truth that we have to reckon with, that the GOP is not a Democratic with a small d party. Their political culture is not that of a democracy. And one of the biggest, they had largely given up the idea of bipartisan governance, even when Trump was coming into office. And think about like these bedrock democratic values, like you may not agree with your opponent, but you respect their right to exist. When the GOP went along with Trump saying lock her up, I mean, this, I think we've normalized these outrageous things. I mean, what does that mean to lock someone up just because she's your opponent? That's what juntas do, right? And Cold War juntas do this.
Right.
And we accepted this, meaning not that you and I accepted it, but it's been around in the culture, and indeed it's become a favored ritual of Trump rallies. There's T-shirts, you could buy saying "lock her up." So we've become desensitized to this level of violence and lawlessness, and that is really scary. And another lesson of history is that many of the leaders who have this kind of success with personality cults and followers who'd say I'll take I'd die for him. They come from backgrounds of journalism or entertainment. A high number of them who I write about, like Mussolini was a journalist, and then Mobutu in the Congo was a journalist. And so they really know how to be what the culture wants them to be. And because they have no morals, no principles beyond getting to power and staying there, they will ally with anyone and they'll be whoever you need them to be. So this is very seductive to people. So I wasn't really surprised, even in the middle of a pandemic and economic, crisis, that he gained votes. The lessons that can be learned, and we saw this with the outcome of the election. So many people mobilized, and even the midterms in 2018 brought record numbers of women and people of color to power. That we have learned, I think, many of us, especially white people who probably took their freedoms for granted. And I think it's been an enormous laboratory of democratic education to have all of this happen, including all the things that went on this summer with the repression of the protests. And, hundreds of journalists were assaulted and detained. And these are things that are not business as usual, that in particular. So we have to build on that. We have to be unified. In the past, including at the rise of Hitler, one of the reasons the right has been able to prevail is because the center and the left were divided. So there'll be that work to do. And then I do believe in building bridges. And I end the book. The book's got plenty of grim things in it, but it ends on a hopeful note about the power of civic education to inculcate democratic values of compassion and solidarity and empathy. So I think that although there's a hardcore of Trump supporters who are just gone, and it's not going to be possible to talk to them, it might be some of your listeners' family members. Both my parents love Trump. Luckily, they're not in the States, so they're not voting, but they adore Trump. But and this is actually my mother who adores Trump, but she said had she been in the States, she also would have voted for him because Biden was going to bring like socialist apocalypse. So I think there were a number of voters who maybe didn't love Trump, but didn't want Biden. The same as we were saying before on the show that many people voted for Biden because he wasn't Trump. I do think there is a subset of voters who thought that Biden would just be the collapse of everything. And when they see that everything's not going to collapse, perhaps they'll be more persuadable. And part of the civic education is to I think that we have shown as a people such a disrespect for life, for people's dignity and people's right to have a living wage and right to have safety from assault weapons and the right to have health care. And Americans have a very different attitude, and some of them don't know any better. Some of them just are resigned, and they're indoctrinated that this is going to be socialism. So I think that a grassroots initiatives to show people with policies also that, as you said, so the Biden-Harris administration has a lot of of work to do, because these years are crucial. We could turn one way and consolidate what Trump has started, or we could, build on the election. And I want to end on this note that it's truly historic what we did with the election, because very few peoples have the chance to turn back a process of authoritarian capture that's ongoing, and we did that. So we can hang on to that, but we have to consolidate the gains.
Ruth Ben-Ghiat, whose book is called Strong Men, From Mussolini to the Present. I encourage you to read this book. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
All right, be well, and thank you. And thank you, all of you who are listening to my podcast. I greatly appreciate it. We're coming up on our 1 year anniversary here in a week or so. So thank you, all of you who've tuned in this past year. This is Rumble, and I am Michael Moore.